the wind whispered through the pines of Brookhaven Estates, bringing with it the scent of cut grass and chlorine, faintly masking the mold that clung to the north side of a time-worn house at the end of Pine Needle Lane. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning, and the HOA patrol cart had just done its second sweep of the block. Outside that house, a modest, sun-faded ranch style with sagging gutters and a cracked driveway, a man knelt by a splintering fence post. His hands, calloused and worn with the quiet strength of someone who had built more than he'd ever spoken of, trembled slightly as he adjusted the hinge of an old wooden gate. The screws were rusted. The paint was peeling. But his eyes, though clouded with age, studied every piece like a surgeon. His name was Harold. 84, widowed, and barely spoken of in the community except in whispers or HOA complaints. The hermit with the fence. The hoarder in Lot 29. The one who never shows up at HOA meetings. Harold didn't need meetings. He needed quiet. He needed routine. He needed the smell of cedar and the creak of old hinges and the memory of her humming in the garden while he fixed things that didn't matter, just to feel useful. The morning was still, until a voice rang out from across the street like a misplaced siren. "Mr. Denton. That fence is a violation of Section 4C. Harold paused, barely turning. The voice belonged to Linda March, HOA Vice President, powerwalker, self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood decorum, and wielder of her clipboard like it were a gavel. "You've had 2 written notices," she said, snapping her oversized sunglasses into place. "If you don't bring it up to code by Thursday, we'll have to escalate." He gave a tired nod and turned back to the wood. Escalate. The word echoed. Harold had seen escalations before. Fines. Threats. One man had his rose bushes uprooted without consent. A single mother had her kids' chalk art washed away by the HOA cleaning crew for defacing shared concrete. And now, his fence, half of which had stood since 1971, was a matter of public emergency. He reached for the next board, ignoring the pulsing ache in his lower back. The wood groaned. His knuckles scraped. A nail fell into the dirt. He didn't mind. He just wanted it to be quiet again. Behind him, a small voice carried over the grass. "You need help, mister?" Harold turned. A boy, maybe 9, stood by the sidewalk. He had a baseball cap that didn't quite fit and a juice box in hand. A Labrador trotted beside him. "I'm good, son," Harold murmured. "But thanks." The boy shrugged. "Okay. Just, you look kinda like my grandpa. He's not around no more." That stopped Harold. He looked up, nodded gently. "Mine neither." The boy smiled faintly and walked off, his dog pausing to sniff the pile of rotten planks before trailing behind. Harold stared after them longer than he needed to. That small, unguarded kindness had slipped in like sunlight through a cracked shutter. But the moment passed. At 10:45 a.m., the HOA cart returned. A camera on the front blinked red. Harold didn't look up as it snapped a picture of his half-fixed fence. Didn't react when it beeped. But somewhere, a warning was filed. The next day, it rained. It came suddenly, as June showers do, sheets of silver across the shingles, hammering the earth. Harold stayed inside, sipping instant coffee from a chipped mug with a faded U.S. Navy insignia. He watched the drops trail down the window, watched the fence lean further into gravity, and felt the weight of time pressing like soaked cloth against the bones. He could still feel her hands over his on mornings like this, back when rain meant music and baking and slow dances and socks. Now it meant creaks in the floorboards and notices in the mail. A knock at the door. He shuffled over, opened it with a grunt. A small paper bag sat on the step. Inside, a sandwich wrapped in foil, a juice box, and a note in handwriting as crooked as fence nails. "Hope you're not hungry. Don't worry. My mom says I'm allowed. Sam, the kid with the dog." Harold blinked slowly. No one had brought him anything since the church potluck in 17. He closed the door without a word, sat back in his chair, and stared at the sandwich as if it were some strange, sacred thing. He didn't need it. Not yet. He wanted it to last. Thursday morning came with birdsong and sirens. 2 police cruisers, 1 HOA cart, and a city truck pulled into Pine Needle Lane like a parade of authority. Linda March stepped out in a pressed blazer, lips thin as a sealed envelope. Behind her, a man in a utility vest unfolded a permit. Harold stepped out slowly. His shirt was clean. His boots were laced. The fence leaned slightly, but he stood straight. "Mr. Denton," Linda announced, voice projecting for every neighbor to hear, "per Article 4C, subsection 9, we are proceeding with removal of your unsafe structure." "It's not unsafe," Harold said softly. "Sir, we gave you notice. It's part of my home." "It's an eyesore," she snapped. A crowd was gathering. Curtains moved. Phones recorded. Harold looked past her, to the truck. A man with bolt cutters was approaching the gate. "Wait," he said, voice suddenly firm. They didn't. The cutter snapped. Wood cracked. The gate fell. Harold stood still as they pulled plank after plank, like bones from a body that still breathed. "He's just an old man," a voice yelled. Heads turned. Sam stood on the sidewalk, fists balled, tears welling. "You didn't even ask. You just came and broke it." Linda turned red. "This is official HOA business, young man. He fixed my bike. He gave me a dog leash when mine broke. He's not bad." Harold looked at the boy, this small spark in the rainstorm of rules, and something in him broke gently. He walked back inside, leaving the chaos behind. And in his garage, behind a shelf of dusty paint cans, he reached up to a panel in the ceiling and pulled down a box marked USACE, Katrina Blueprints, Emergency Projects 2005 to 2007, H. Denton. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a silence that clung to Pine Needle Lane like dew to grass. In the quiet hum of early morning, inside a small house across from Harold Denton's, young Sam sat at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a cooling cup of cocoa. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying anymore. Instead, he stared intently at the wooden shard his mother had placed between them, smooth on one side, cracked on the other, and marked with a faded carving, "For Emma, who believed in rebuilding the world one board at a time." Leah Carter had seen plenty of odd things during her years as a local reporter, town hall scandals, election meltdowns, even the occasional petty crime, but this wasn't just about a fence. Something about the way Harold had stood in silence while his property was dismantled, something about that little inscription carved into scrap wood, it whispered of a story buried far deeper than Pine Needle Lane wanted to admit. She turned to her laptop, fingers moving with practiced urgency. Harold Denton, Army Corps of Engineers, Katrina. She barely got through typing it when results popped up, faster than she'd expected. Articles from the early 2000s. Photos of a younger man standing in muddy boots with disaster relief teams. Citations. Government awards. A commendation signed by the Louisiana governor. Testimonies from survivors describing a man named Denton who designed emergency bridges in days, not weeks. One woman even called him the only reason we made it out. Leah blinked, processing the enormity of what she'd just uncovered. And all this time, he'd lived across the street from her son. The same man who repaired a child's broken leash without asking for anything in return. The same man HOA had humiliated in broad daylight. Across the road, Harold sat in his garage with the same quiet deliberation that had carried him through the chaos of disaster zones. Blueprints from another life were spread across his dusty workbench, trembling faintly under the slow turning of a rusted ceiling fan. His hands, though aged and veined, moved with precision. He reviewed old measurements, recalculated weights. He didn't know why, yet, but something inside him had stirred. Maybe it was the boy's note. Maybe it was the sound of that gate being snapped in half like it meant nothing. Or maybe it was the memory of Emma's voice in his head, reminding him that broken things deserved more than being thrown away. That morning, Leah and Sam crossed the street. Harold answered the door without surprise. Leah introduced herself not as a neighbor, but as someone who knew his past now. She carried a manila folder in one hand, filled with reprinted articles. His legacy, she said. Not just the man who fixed fences. The man who saved communities. Harold didn't say much. Just nodded, his eyes scanning the headlines, his lips pressed together. And when Sam blurted out that he wanted to help rebuild the fence, Harold didn't hesitate. Only if you're good with a hammer, he said. Sam beamed. I hit stuff all the time. By mid-morning, the clack of tools echoed through the neighborhood. Harold worked slowly but with purpose. Leah took measurements. Sam painted a plank sky blue with a brush too big for his hand. They worked as if they were building something sacred, not just wood and nails, but memory and redemption. Some neighbors watched from their porches, unsure whether to admire or report. No one moved. Until she arrived. Linda March. The HOA vice president stormed toward them, her heels clacking like a gavel down the driveway. Her clipboard was cocked like a weapon. Mr. Denton, you are not authorized to build a structure without pre-approval, she barked. Harold didn't flinch. Leah stepped forward, arms folded. It's not a structure, Leah said. It's a community project. It's art. For the kids. This is HOA property, Linda hissed. No, Harold replied, finally looking up. This is my fence. You've already been fined. Then fine me again. Linda's mouth opened, but no words came. Instead, she turned to Sam. And you, your mother should know better. She does, Leah said coolly. I'm his mother. And I know a good man when I see one. Linda left, seething. But not before Leah snapped a photo. Harold, standing before the rebuilt frame of the new fence, son behind him, a boy at his side, paintbrush in hand. That night, she uploaded the photo with a caption that simply read, "The Fence Rebuilder, What One Old Man is Teaching Us About Community." Within hours, it spread like fire through a dry field. Comments poured in. Shares climbed. By morning, the story had passed 6,000 shares. By noon, her inbox had flooded with interview requests. Local news, bloggers, even a retired FEMA official who recognized the name. At 3:17 p.m., a black SUV pulled quietly into Pine Needle Lane. It had no HOA decals, no county plates. Just a gold insignia on the side, State Veteran Affairs. Harold opened the door to find a man in uniform holding a laminated photo. Are you Harold Denton? The man asked, voice low but steady. I've been trying to find you for years. Harold looked at the photo. It was him. In the mud. Standing with an arm around a soldier no older than 20. In the corner, barely legible, was a signature, "Thank you, sir. You saved my family." Harold's hand trembled slightly as he took the photo, the moment hanging in the air like thunder just before the storm. Harold stood at the doorway, the photo trembling lightly in his weathered hands. The man before him wore the pressed uniform of a state officer, but there was a weight in his eyes that said he had come not on orders, but on something closer to debt. Or memory. I'm sorry to show up like this, the man said softly, but I saw the article this morning. And I couldn't believe it. I'd almost thought you were just a ghost from a long time ago. Harold glanced down at the photo again. Mud. Floodwaters. His own arm around the soldier. The caption faded but familiar. St. Bernard Parish, 2006. The man took off his cap. Lieutenant Paul Mendez, sir. You saved my life. And my sister's. The words struck Harold in the chest like a defibrillator. Not because he didn't remember, but because he had never expected anyone to carry that memory this far. Come in, Harold said quietly. Inside, the house was modest, humble, and filled with things that hadn't been moved in years. Faded photographs. A sewing machine that hadn't worked since Emma passed. A folded flag in a triangular case. But there, on the kitchen table, were maps and blueprints, Harold's old life laid bare again. Mendez looked at them with reverence. You kept them. I kept everything that mattered, Harold replied. They sat for over an hour. Paul recounted the flood, the evacuation center where he and his sister waited without food for 2 days, the rumors of bridges being rebuilt by ghosts in the night. Then, one morning, the sound of trucks. The face of an older man yelling commands like a general with a pencil behind his ear. Harold had engineered an entire temporary route in 72 hours, while FEMA was still fumbling logistics. I never got to say thank you, Paul said, his voice cracking. You just did, Harold murmured. Silence fell, gentle and heavy. Then Paul leaned in. I need to ask you something. It's not official. It's personal. Do you know what happened to the woman in this photo? Harold's heart caught in his throat. Emma. She stood between them now, invisible and undeniable. She was my wife, he said after a pause. She passed in 2011. Paul bowed his head. She was the first person who handed my sister a bottle of water after the rescue. She held her while she cried. Your wife saved her from trauma that would have lasted a lifetime. Harold said nothing. But he felt her again. In the room. In the weight of this moment. The conversation shifted slowly toward the present. Paul had become a state advocate for veteran emergency engineers. He had seen the worst and the best of bureaucracy, and what Harold had endured at the hands of his HOA stirred a different kind of fury in him. They don't know who you are, he said. But I do. And so does this state. I'm going to fix this. I don't want revenge, Harold said quietly. No, Paul replied. You deserve something better. Outside, Sam was painting again, this time with his friends. The fence was becoming a mural. Bright colors. Sketched suns. Flowers. Smiling faces. Some shaky, others confident. But together, it was beautiful. Neighbors who had once avoided Harold's house now slowed to glance. Some nodded. One elderly woman brought lemonade. Another asked if she could donate brushes. Little by little, something was changing. Leah watched from her porch, phone in hand. She hadn't published the follow-up story yet, but her fingers hovered over the keys. She'd seen how one moment of kindness, when shared the right way, could shift the entire narrative of a town. Then her phone buzzed. An email. From the editorial board of the American Spirit, a national publication dedicated to honoring unsung heroes. Subject, story pitch accepted, the fence rebuilder. She blinked. They wanted a full feature. National coverage. Across the street, Linda March stood frozen at her front window, clutching her tablet with whitening knuckles. Her inbox was flooded with angry comments. She had been tagged in over 50 posts demanding an apology. The HOA group chat was in flames. She pulled down the blinds. But it was too late. Later that evening, Harold sat on his porch with a blanket over his knees. Sam brought him a small cardboard box tied with string. We made this, the boy said proudly. It's called a kindness kit. Inside, a sandwich, a bottle of water, a pencil, a drawing of Harold with a cape, and a note. Because heroes deserve lunch, too. Harold's throat tightened. Then headlights lit up the driveway. Another car. Unfamiliar. A man stepped out in a dark suit, holding a thin leather case. Mr. Denton, he called out. I'm here on behalf of the governor's office. We'd like to formally invite you to a recognition ceremony. Harold blinked. For what? The man smiled. For everything you've ever done. And everything you're still doing. Sam whispered, I told you you're a hero. Harold didn't reply. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, and somewhere deep inside, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe it. But just as the moment began to settle, a different car crept into view. Black, tinted windows, no plates. It parked slowly, too slowly. The man inside didn't step out. He just sat there, engine idling. Harold stared back, his instincts suddenly taut. Sam tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Denton, do you know that man?" Harold squinted into the dusk. "No," he said softly. "But I think someone sent him." Harold didn't move at first. He simply sat there, blanket over his knees, the cardboard kindness kit still in his lap. Sam stood beside him, holding tight to the arm of the chair, eyes flickering between Harold's calm expression and the black car parked across the street. The vehicle remained still. No door opened. No window rolled down. Just the low hum of the engine against the quiet dusk. Leah crossed the lawn quickly, phone in hand, her tone sharp. "That car's not from the neighborhood. I know every car on this block." She stopped beside Harold, eyes narrowing. "Do you want me to call someone?" Harold held up a hand, not to silence her, but to still the wind that was starting to rise inside them all. He wasn't afraid. But he wasn't careless either. "No," he said, voice low. "Let's wait." They waited. 5 minutes. Then 10. Still nothing. Then, at last, the car pulled slowly away from the curb. It didn't accelerate. It just rolled into the twilight like it had come to observe and found enough. As the taillights disappeared, Harold finally stood. Sam looked up. Was he from the HOA? Harold shook his head. No. That was something else. He didn't explain. He wasn't sure how. It wasn't fear that settled in his chest, it was recognition. Whoever that was, they knew him. Or knew of him. And they hadn't come for the mural or the blog post. They came for something older. Deeper. Back inside, Harold reached for a file he hadn't touched in years. It was marked redacted, storm vault access in sharp black ink. He flipped through pages he thought he had long buried, emergency clearance codes, FEMA site layouts, security clearance logs with names he hadn't read in over a decade. He found one that made his breath hitch. Mendez. Not Paul. Marcus Mendez. Same last name. Different division. Former field commander. Last known status, discharged, internal investigation pending. Harold stared at the name until the ink blurred. It couldn't be coincidence. Meanwhile, across town, Linda March was fighting her own kind of storm. The HOA office, once her kingdom of printed bylaws and laminated maps, had become a battlefield. Emails flooded in by the hour. Angry neighbors forwarded the viral story. Someone tagged her in a meme. The mayor's office requested clarification on community disruption. And this morning, a printed letter had been taped to her door. Harold rebuilt cities. You couldn't rebuild a mailbox. Her hands trembled. Her voice cracked when she addressed the remaining board members. This is out of control. We need to issue a public statement. We need to discredit him. But even her most loyal ally, Frank Dobson, head of landscape enforcement, was hesitant. Linda, he said gently, it's not just about fences anymore. And it wasn't. Because by the end of that week, Harold's fence had transformed. No longer just boards and nails, it had become a wall of stories. Children painted dreams. Veterans pinned notes. One elderly woman stapled a photo of her son, lost in Katrina, with a note that read, "You helped build the bridge they found him on." The media returned. Local news. Then state. Then a national crew. Drones buzzed overhead. Reporters lined the sidewalk. Leah tried to shield Sam from the noise, but the boy beamed every time someone asked if he helped build the mural. Then came the message. A white envelope slipped under Harold's door while no one was looking. No stamp. No name. Just a typed letter, on crisp paper. We know who you are. Some debts were never meant to be forgiven. Keep rebuilding, and we'll tear down more than just fences. There was no signature. Harold read it twice. Then folded it in half and placed it beside the photo Paul Mendez had given him. He didn't panic. He didn't call the police. He just looked out the window at the fence, at the colors, the laughter, the chalk drawings in the driveway. And he knew one thing. They were afraid. Afraid of what kindness could expose. Afraid of what one forgotten man, reawakened, could still do. That night, he wrote a letter. To an old contact in D.C. To a woman named Colleen Fairchild, now Deputy Director of Emergency Infrastructure Security. One of the few who still owed him a favor. He kept it short. They found me. And they haven't forgotten. If anything happens to me, please protect the files in Vault 7B. You know what's in there. HD. He sealed the envelope, placed it in Leah's mailbox without a word, and returned to the porch just as the sun dipped below the rooftops. Across the street, the black car returned. But this time, someone stepped out. He wasn't from the HOA. He wasn't from the press. He wore no badge. No uniform. But Harold knew him instantly. Marcus Mendez. The brother. The one who disappeared after the audits. The one who'd wanted access to something Harold had locked away, something that shouldn't have been reopened. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stood there. Watching. And then, without a word, turned and walked toward Harold's fence, toward the wall of kindness, and pulled a single plank free. Just one. Harold didn't move. He just whispered, "It begins again." Harold didn't rise from the porch as Marcus pulled the painted board from the kindness wall. He didn't shout. Didn't stop him. He simply watched, steadily, as the man he hadn't seen in over a decade held the painted plank like it was a loaded file. Like it meant something more. Marcus didn't glance up. He flipped the plank over, staring at the childish scribble on the back, "Mr. Harold is my hero." Then, like a man placing a flag on conquered ground, he rested it against the fence and walked away. Leah came out a moment later, tension in her step. "Who was that?" she asked. Harold's eyes were still locked on the place where Marcus had stood. "Ghost from the past," he said. "Wearing the face of the future." He didn't explain further. That night, Harold barely touched dinner. In his study, under the dim glow of a desk lamp, he reopened a folder he had sworn never to unseal, marked in red ink, "Black Salt, Vault 7B." Not many knew the name. Even fewer understood what it had almost become. Inside, satellite schematics, clearance codes, FEMA field documents, a single classified project from the tail end of his government days, pitched as flood control and community monitoring, but in reality, a covert biometric tracking system meant to preemptively identify behavioral threats in refugee populations. Harold had refused to sign off. Had burned bridges to bury it. But now? Now it was clawing back to the surface. One sheet in particular made his stomach tighten. Marcus Mendez, field access candidate, conditional security pass, revoked. Marcus wasn't just another face from the old world. He had once tried to access Vault 7B. Across the street, Leah's inbox pinged with an anonymous email. "Ask Harold about Black Salt." The truth wasn't buried, it was repainted. Attached was a photo, the kindness wall, circled in red where Marcus had removed the plank. She rushed over to Harold's porch, holding her phone up like it was a warrant. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded. "Who's watching us? Why does my son's art keep showing up in threats?" Harold looked down, then calmly stood and closed the door behind her. "Because when you use kindness to cover up darkness," he said, "there will always be someone trying to rip it down." Leah blinked. "You mean you were part of something?" "I tried to stop something," Harold said. "And that's why they want me quiet now." She couldn't find words. Outside, Sam ran up, beaming. "Mom. There are new people filming the fence. One of them asked me who Mr. Harold really is." Leah's face dropped. She and Harold both walked quickly to the street. 3 men stood near the fence, dressed like civilians, holding cameras and microphones but no press credentials. One knelt by the wall, filming close-ups of a child's painting. Another asked a woman about the man who used to build bridges in secret. Leah approached first. "Who are you with?" The man smiled politely. "We're freelancers. Documenting community murals." "Then where's your press ID?" she pressed. "We're independent," he shrugged. That's when Harold approached. Calm. Clear-eyed. Wearing a crisp shirt tucked neatly into old but polished boots. "You're not here for a story," Harold said. "You're here to collect footage for someone else." The cameraman stayed silent. Harold took a single step forward. "Turn off the camera." No one moved. I said, "Turn it off." Finally, a button clicked. The lens powered down. Harold looked into the man's eyes and spoke slowly. "I know who sent you. I know what they want. But let me be perfectly clear, this neighborhood, this fence, these kids, they're not going to be used as leverage." Another man smirked. "And what are you going to do about it, Denton? Send another letter to the governor?" "No," Harold replied, folding his arms. "I already called the one person in D.C. who still honors their promises. In 72 hours, every piece of data from Vault 7B will be sent to 3 independent newsrooms. If anything happens to me, to Leah, to the children drawing on this wall, you won't just be exposed. You'll be erased by the court of public opinion." The men went silent. One gave a slow, mocking smile. "Careful, Mr. Denton. Kindness is a thin wall. One good storm can tear it down." Harold didn't flinch. "I've built bridges in hurricanes." By late afternoon, a brown envelope arrived on Leah's doorstep. Inside were full copies of black salt, signed government memos, maps, photos, redacted testimony. She sat at her kitchen table, hands shaking as she turned each page. She didn't understand every acronym. But she understood the stakes. This wasn't just about an old fence. This was about power. Silence. And a man who had dared say no. From the hallway, Sam peeked in. "Mom, can I show Mr. Harold my boat drawing? I made it for him." Leah forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart." That night, Harold returned to the fence alone. He carried something sacred, a letter from Emma, worn at the folds, written before she passed. It read, "If you make it through, promise me you'll build again. Not walls to keep people out, but walls to remind them someone still cared." Harold nailed the letter to the spot Marcus had ripped open. A single act of defiance. What he didn't know was that across the street, under the glow of a broken streetlight, Marcus was watching. He held a burner phone in one hand. It buzzed once. "The files are moving. Stop him now. Plan B is in effect." He slipped the phone away and pulled out a small black hard drive. One label. Vault 7B, partial clone. Rain fell in thin sheets the next morning, washing the chalk art from the sidewalk. The mural on the kindness wall had begun to smear in watercolor streaks, reds and yellows trailing like tears down the planks. But the letter from Emma stayed pinned, protected by a sheet of plexiglass Harold had added in the night. Inside Leah's kitchen, a silence hung over the table. She stared at the folder of black salt documents with her phone in one hand and a fresh email blinking on screen. Subject: Invitation to National Morning Live, Voices of Integrity Special Segment. They wanted her on air. Live. To speak about Harold Denton. About the mural. About a man quietly resisting something much bigger than himself. "I'm not a reporter," she said aloud, mostly to herself. "I'm not a voice of integrity." Harold looked up from the window, where he'd been silently watching the rain fall. "You are now." She hesitated. "If I speak, they'll come for me too." Harold nodded. "Then speak louder." He slid something across the table, a USB drive. Leah picked it up. "What's on it?" "My full statement. My testimony. Everything I knew, everything I buried, and everything I still remember. If they're going to target us, We might as well control the narrative. Leah's breath caught. You're giving me everything? I'm giving you truth. I'm trusting you not to waste it. That night, she packed a small overnight bag and kissed Sam's forehead as he slept. She left him with Harold, knowing he'd be safer here, safer than out there with her. She didn't notice the black sedan parked half a block down. Headlights off. Engine running. The studio in the city was sterile, cold in that corporate, polished way. But the producer was kind, and the makeup artist whispered, "My dad was in St. Bernard. You're doing something big here." On set, the host was all charm. Cameras rolled. Leah breathed in. Then out. And told the world. She spoke of Harold's fence, the mysterious threats, the file labeled black salt, the buried government program, the mural, the people reclaiming dignity through color and courage. She didn't cry until she spoke about Emma's letter. A wall doesn't have to divide. Sometimes, it holds together what the world tries to pull apart. The clip went viral before she left the studio. But so did something else. A doctored video began circulating only minutes later, footage edited to show Harold making cryptic statements, implying he'd leaked national security data for profit. Within hours, certain news accounts flooded timelines with the hashtag. #Harold the Traitor. Harold saw it unfold in real time from the kitchen. But he didn't panic. He made coffee. He fed Sam breakfast. Then he opened the storage bench in the living room and pulled out a dusty box. Inside, a satellite phone, a worn tactical map of the city, and a name written in faded marker. Colleen F., last trusted hand. Across town, Marcus watched Leah step out of the studio and head to a taxi. He followed. Not in the usual way. He followed with precision, no headlights, no tail. At a traffic light, she noticed the car. Her eyes met his for half a second. Marcus didn't blink. She told the driver to take a detour. Back at the house, Harold was on the satellite phone, voice firm. "Colleen, I need to know. Was there a clone made of Vault 7B? Silence. Then, there wasn't supposed to be. But, yes. A fragment. We think Mendez took it. How dangerous is it? You remember the phrase, behavior. Infrastructure. Memory." Harold went cold. "That's what they're after," he said. "Not files. Not leverage. They're trying to rewrite history." At that moment, the front door burst open. Sam screamed. Harold turned, instincts snapping into place, but it wasn't an attacker. It was Leah. Panting. Shaking. Soaked to the bone. "He followed me," she gasped. "All the way here. He's outside." Harold stood, motioned Sam into the bedroom. Then he stepped outside, into the storm. Marcus stood at the edge of the driveway, holding the drive in one hand and something else in the other. A photo. Of Harold, 20 years younger, in front of a temporary bridge, holding hands with 2 children. Marcus's voice was quiet. Controlled. "You saved my brother, but you buried my career." "You buried it yourself," Harold replied. Marcus held out the photo. "That's me. That's me in the picture. But the world never knew. You erased me when you stopped Black Salt. You chose their story, not mine." Harold's voice dropped. "No, Marcus. I chose humanity." Rain thundered around them. "I'm going to plug this in," Marcus said, lifting the drive. "And when I do, history rewrites itself." "Not if I stop you first," Harold said. Marcus smiled faintly. Then the car down the block exploded. A fireball lit up the night. And Harold whispered, "Plan C just began." The fire roared into the night, hurling a column of flame and shrapnel into the sky. Glass rained down on the street. Car alarms screamed from blocks away. Sam cried out from the back room, and Leah ran to him, holding the boy tight as the windows shook in their frames. Outside, Harold stood motionless in the driveway, the orange glow reflecting off his glasses. Marcus didn't flinch. "Your move," he said. Harold's voice was like steel drawn slowly from a sheath. "That wasn't me." For the first time, Marcus's expression cracked. "Then who?" But Harold was already moving, grabbing him by the wrist and wrenching the drive from his hand. The photo fluttered to the wet asphalt. Marcus struggled, but Harold, older, yes, but forged in harder fires, pinned him against the side of the porch. "You think I buried you?" Harold growled. "You think erasing a program is the same as erasing a man?" "I built what they asked." Marcus shouted. "You walked away. You got to be the hero." "I got scrubbed from the logs like I never existed." Harold released him suddenly. "I didn't erase you, Marcus. I saved you from becoming a ghost in a machine built to enslave memory." Behind them, sirens began wailing. The glow of the explosion lit up the rooftops like dawn arriving too early, too fast. Leah appeared at the door, Sam behind her. "Harold," she said, "we have to go. Now." Harold turned back to Marcus, who had slumped against the railing, clutching his shoulder. "This isn't over," Marcus hissed. "They'll keep coming. And when they do, they won't be gentle." "I know," Harold said, eyes dark. "But neither will I." He turned to Leah. "Get the truck." They drove for hours, cutting across state lines, dodging traffic cams, bypassing rest stops. Sam curled up in the back seat, sleeping fitfully beneath a quilt. Leah's knuckles were white on the wheel. Harold checked the USB again. It hadn't been wiped. Whatever Marcus had planned, it hadn't been uploaded yet. "You sure it's not a trap?" Leah asked. "It's raw data," Harold said. "Encrypted, not yet indexed. Which means they needed time. Time we just stole back." He glanced at the rearview mirror. One black SUV. 2 lanes back. No headlights. "They're following." Leah's voice cracked. "What do we do?" "We don't run," Harold said. "We deliver." "To who?" Harold took out a burner phone. Dialed a number he hadn't used in 15 years. A gravelly voice answered. "You're early." "I'm late," Harold replied. "Meet us at the silo." The line went dead. The silo was buried on a private plot of farmland just outside Ruston, Louisiana, once part of a FEMA test zone, now abandoned. A concrete cylinder stood like a forgotten missile shaft, half covered in moss and vines. Harold keyed in a rusted code on the panel. The door groaned open. They entered. The inside was dark, humming with dormant power. A single console blinked to life as Harold stepped forward and slid the drive into the port. A blue prompt appeared. Vault 7B access, partial match detected. Leah hovered behind him. "What is all this?" "Proof," Harold said. That what they called security was surveillance. That black salt wasn't just data, it was emotion mining, memory conditioning, behavior modeling at scale. They weren't just predicting disasters, they were building them. A second door opened behind them. A woman entered, tall, gray hair in a braid, military poise. "Colleen Fairchild," Leah said under her breath. Colleen looked at Harold. "You brought friends." "I brought witnesses." She nodded once. "Good. Because if this hits the open net, it'll either start a national reckoning or get us all buried." Sam tugged on Harold's coat. "Mr. Harold." "I'm scared." Harold knelt down, hands on the boy's shoulders. "You're brave. Being scared means you understand what's at stake. But who are the bad guys?" Harold looked toward the drive, toward the echoing silence in the silo. "The ones who want to decide the future without remembering the past." Outside, the SUV stopped at the tree line. Men in unmarked gear stepped out, tactical, silent, fast. Colleen's radio crackled. "They're here." She drew a weapon. Leah backed Sam into a corner. Harold stood tall, finally fully himself. No longer retired. No longer hiding. Just a man standing between history and those who wanted to rewrite it. "We hold them off," he said. "Long enough to upload it." Colleen took her position. Leah found a fire axe on the wall and gripped it like her life depended on it, because now it did. The first flashbang came through the ceiling vent. Light. Noise. Chaos. And in the flicker before darkness fell again, the upload bar read 64%. The flashbang split the silence like a thunderclap, turning the air white-hot. Sam screamed. Leah threw herself over him, shielding the boy with her body. Sparks rained from the ceiling. The old silo shuddered like it remembered war. Harold didn't flinch. He lunged for the console. 68%. Colleen shouted through the haze, "They're breaching the east stairwell." A burst of gunfire echoed through the chamber. Colleen fired back, precise, controlled. Harold slammed the manual override to lock the lower levels. The steel doors groaned and then slammed shut, just enough time bought. Just enough breath. 73%. Leah helped Sam into the equipment cage, metal, reinforced. "Don't come out unless I say so," she yelled. He nodded, tears streaking down his cheeks but silent. "Brave." One intruder dropped from the ceiling, landing with a hard thud behind the servers. Harold spun with the fire axe he had grabbed from the wall, intercepting the attacker mid-lunge. Metal struck shoulder. The man collapsed, wheezing. "Stay away from the drive," Harold growled. 84%. Another man tackled Colleen from behind. She flipped him hard into a pillar but took a hit to the ribs. She staggered, blood in her mouth. "I told you they'd come," she gasped. "And they're not stopping at bullets." 89%. Leah joined Harold, helping drag a second hard drive across the chamber, one of the mirrored backups. "Plan C?" she asked through her breath. Harold shook his head. "Plan D now." "What's D?" "Detonator," he said. "As in, no one walks away with this unless it's finished." Suddenly, silence fell again. Too quiet. Then a new voice echoed down the stairwell, slow, clear, taunting. "You don't have to die here, Denton." "Marcus." His voice came closer with every step. "I tried to let you live. Tried to walk away. But you forced my hand." Harold turned toward the stairwell as Marcus entered, eyes glassy, soaked in rain, holding a small black device. "The kill switch." "You plug that in," Harold said, "and the truth dies with us." Marcus shrugged. "Then we both become legends." Colleen raised her gun. Marcus aimed his device. 94%. "Don't," Harold said. "You're better than this." Marcus's hands shook. "I was you, Harold. Once. I believed in the system. I believed in honor. But you know what that got me? Forgotten." 96%. "You think people will remember this as your revenge?" Harold asked, stepping closer. "Or your failure?" Marcus didn't answer. Leah moved behind him, slow, careful. 98%. She grabbed a pipe. Swung. Crack. The device flew from Marcus's hands, skidding across the floor. Colleen shot it once, spark and smoke. Useless now. Marcus fell to his knees. Harold turned back. 99%. A single breath. Then. Upload complete. A tone echoed through the chamber. Vault 7 be distributed to global press channels. Secure replication complete. No further user input required. They did it. Harold closed his eyes. And let go. The aftermath blurred like a memory seen through tears. Federal agents swarmed the silo hours later, real ones this time. The kind with credentials and cameras and questions they couldn't quite ask aloud. Marcus was taken, silent. Colleen disappeared into the wind, like she always had. Harold gave a single statement. If telling the truth is dangerous, imagine living a lie. He declined further interviews. Leah was offered a contract to write a book. She refused. Instead, she helped repaint the fence with Sam. A new plank. Bright green. Painted in shaky 7-year-old letters. The truth lives here. Weeks passed. The smear campaign against Harold dissolved. A formal apology was issued. But Harold didn't care. He just walked to the fence every morning. Checked each nail. Each stroke of color. Made sure the wall stayed whole. One quiet morning, Sam ran to him with a small envelope. Inside, a note. Typed. No signature. We'll build again. In shadow. But you taught them to look into the light. Harold folded the note and smiled faintly. The war wasn't over. But the silence had been broken. He stood at the fence, hand on Emma's letter beneath the plexiglass. A breeze stirred. And somewhere, far beyond the city, another wall was being painted. One act of kindness at a time.